Welcome to our mini class today on iridology. Today we're talking about the process of doing an iris assessment, how to layer up iris information. Now, before we start that, just want to throw out a reminder for anyone who watches this on the replay to take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, maybe even share this video with a friend so that we can get this information out to more people. I really appreciate your help with that. I'd like to just do a quick sort of lay of the land here. How many of you have iridology training already? If you do, drop a comment in the chat box. That's going to help me know how deep I should be going or how much introductory information I need to be sharing here. I just want you to remember as well that the more you play with me in the chat box, the more information you'll get out of me. So do you have any iridology training yet? Or are you just beginning? And it's not a shame situation here at all. It's just going to help me do this on the fly. All right. Do you have audio? Can you hear me? Let me know if you can hear me. Let's start there. Yes, you can hear me. Excellent. Okay, that's so good. So good. I'm glad you can hear me. I think I've got it turned on for everybody to comment. Yes, yes. So again, how many of you have any iridology training? And it's perfectly fine to say no training. That's going to help me shape our presentation today. All right. So with this, I want you to make sure you've got a pen and paper. This is going to be interactive, and you're probably going to want to take some notes. And I find that when I take notes, it helps me to remember things better and it helps me to focus on what I'm doing. So, and again, if you're watching this on the replay, remember to like it and share it and subscribe and all that good stuff. I'm going to pop in here first with a really quick introduction because some of you, I think, are new to me. Some of you have been around for a little while with me, and that's great. My name is Judith Cobb. I've been studying holistic health since the late 1970s, and I've been coaching and teaching holistic health since the early 1980s. I'm a master herbalist, a natural nutrition clinical practitioner, and an International Iridology Practitioners Association Level 3 certified iridology instructor. That is the highest level they have so far, and I am one of only 10 in the world. I teach health professionals how to use iridology to assess their clients quickly and accurately while developing deep rapport and enhancing client care and eliminating unpaid report writing time. That is so important. I don't know anyone that likes spending time writing reports, right? So doing iridology the way I teach it helps my students as practitioners to not have to do those lengthy reports. My original training, which started over 40 years ago, about 45 years ago now, was strictly Jensen. Have you heard of Bernard Jensen? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm ever grateful to my iridology teacher for getting me started with Bernard's work, but iridology in North America was still in its infancy, and I ran into two stumbling blocks in the first few years. The first was it was taking me hours to do an iris assessment, and I was working a lot of unpaid overtime writing up iridology reports. The second was that while my clients were feeling better, we were not seeing the changes in their eyes that we were told we would see for doing some high-powered cleanses and all the right supplements. And that was frustrating. As I got more and more frustrated, I had the opportunity to learn constitutional iridology. It was just emerging in the States and, of course, a few years later here in Canada. And what I discovered as I studied this was that constitutional iridology was far more accurate. It helped me to create my iris assessments and to create my protocols very quickly and very precisely. And it also helped me to create protocols that my clients could stick with. Now, I would love to know how many of you work with clients. Are you seeing clients now as a nutritionist, as a herbalist, as a functional nutrition practitioner, or a functional medicine nurse or doctor? How many of you are in that situation where you're actually working with clients? Love to see that in the chat box. Crystal says, brand new to all of this, no clients. Crystal, welcome. Welcome. You're in a good place if you're brand new to this. We'll introduce you gently and solidly, right? I'm glad you're here. Thanks, Crystal. Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on that? So today we are going to walk through layering up iridology. You've seen so many people probably on social media that look at eye photos and they just start lobbing things out at you, like all the markers they see and all the potential problems that that could mean. And sometimes they're saying, you have this problem just based on what they're seeing in the eyes. That's a big no-no. And then they're giving these long lists of recommendations. That's the best way to overwhelm your client. And Amanda's here. Nurse newish to this. Welcome, Amanda. So good. What I'm going to show you tonight is how to do this in a logical, sequential way that will give you the information you need when you know the pieces quickly and easily, and in a way that will help you to not overwhelm your client. How does that sound? Does that sound like a good thing? No more writing reports outside of office hours or outside of client time, but really getting your work done while you're with your client and in a way that is meaningful to your client. So here we go. This is, and Amanda's loving that. Love that, Amanda. Perfect, perfect. I want you to, as we're going through, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. Okay. This is one of my clients. She's in her 60s. She's a really, really dear lady. She's one of, I love all my clients, but I do love some. I shouldn't say I love some more than others, but I really enjoy working with this client. Let me put it that way. There are very specific steps to doing an iris assessment quickly and well, and I call these layers. Okay, we just keep it real simple, layers. We're not going to give it a fancy name. When we're doing an iris assessment, we have to have some basic information from the client. We need to know their personal and family health history. That is going to give us context. It's going to give us a frame within which to assess these eyes. We also need to know, what does this client want our help with? I do not play the crystal ball game. What I mean by that is, some people say, look at my eyes and tell me what's wrong. It's like, no, because your eyes don't tell me what's wrong. Your eyes tell me where you have predispositions. Your symptoms will help me to understand which of those predispositions are active now. And that will help me to understand then how to work with this, right? So I'm never looking at an eye cold and going, well, you've got this problem and this problem and this problem. That's not right. I call that crystal ball iridology, and we do not do that. In Jensen, however, that's what we were taught to do. And I was taught it didn't matter what the client's history was. I was just going to look at the eyes and I was going to start assigning problem, 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 ooh, problem, right? We were just going to assign problems. But that didn't take into account that this client might be doing a lot of things really right for their health that might be helping their body to function on the best end of its spectrum, and that might be preventing symptoms. Does that make sense? That we need to know the history, we need to know a little bit about the person. If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. Yeah, Chanel says makes sense, and Crystal says makes sense. Yeah, thanks so much for that. Anyone else thinking that just makes good sense? That's the way to run a client session. So these eyes show us inherent predispositions. Think of it as epigenetics, right? Epigenetics is a big word now, where we know we've all got genes, and our diet and our lifestyle and our supplements and how much stress we have and how much sleep we get can turn genes on and off. The eyes show us much about the epigenes. Now, everyone's got lots of genes. Like, we've all got the same number of genes, but we all don't have the same epigenes turned on or off. We know that changing the diet, the lifestyle, and the supplements can change which genes are turned on or off. And we didn't change the genetic structure by doing that. We just activated some genes and deactivated others. We did change, therefore, by changing diet or adding supplements, we changed how the genes behaved. So when we look at irides, we see what areas of the body the genes want to affect. Whether those areas display symptoms or not depends on, again, what that person is doing for their health. The irides show us which areas want to misbehave if they are not well cared for. The irides don't show us what is going on in the body right now. The symptoms will also tell us that. The symptoms tell us what's going on. So here's our client. Her symptoms: she has a history of lymphatic swelling that was difficult to resolve. She has a history of irritable bowel syndrome that shows up more commonly than not as constipation. And she's got a history of candida. Now, we won't see candida in the iris because it's not a genetic situation. The irides show us genetic potentials. Candida is not a genetic potential. Do you agree with me? Candida is not a genetic potential. If you agree with me, just give me a yes in the comments box. So this client, excellent, thank you, Crystal. This client has a lot of stress in her family dynamics, and they've been going on for years. Lots of issues with her mom, with a sister, even with one of her daughters. And so I'm not in on all of it, but there has been a lot of stress over the years, and there's no immediate sign of that abating or resolving. This client always feels exhausted, and she wants to feel joy. She wants to have energy to do this day, and that was why she came to me. Her cholesterol was elevated. It was 5.92. Now, I know in the US and in Canada, we have different scales for things. So I'm going to give you the Canadian scale for things. Her cholesterol was 5.92, and the normal should be 3.62 to 5.15. So she was quite elevated. Her LDL was also elevated at 3.72. We would like that to be under 3.34. Her hemoglobin A1C was good. It was at 5.1. Healthy is 3.0 to 5.7. So she was right in a good spot with that. Her diet was pretty good, but there's always room for improvement, right? So you might want to write her diet down. In a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to what you think of it. Okay, so you might want to write this down. She starts her day with 2 mugs of lemon water, so warm lemon water. She follows that with a coffee. And then she follows that with a green smoothie, which is built on the base of a plant protein powder, protein shake powder. So that's her breakfast: 2 mugs of lemon water, a coffee, then a green smoothie that has the plant protein in it. Her lunch is usually like chicken with quinoa or hummus. She might put a green salad with that, or maybe some cooked vegetables, depending on what's left over in the fridge. Okay, so she got protein, quinoa or hummus, a Greek salad, maybe some cooked veg. Her dinner is often fish. Salmon is very common, or some other animal protein, and more veggies. In the evening, she snacks on fresh blueberries. She enjoys homemade soup when she has time to make it. And she eats very little dairy products and very little bread or grain products, except for the quinoa, which is technically probably not a grain. So what do you think? Does her diet sound pretty good? Let me know in the chat box if you think that sounds pretty good. Give me good in the chat box if you think it sounds pretty good. Yeah, Crystal says, I would say so. Yeah, I agree with you, Crystal. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? That whether you think her diet's pretty much, it's not perfect. Nobody's ever is, but it's decent and it's moving in the right direction. So she had no surgeries and was not on any medication, so completely present and accounted for. She'd used supplements for many years and typically chose better brands over the big box and cheap brands. So that was really good. So that is the first layer of information we need. We need to know what her diet is like, what her stress levels are like, what the family history is like. right? We need that information because that's going to temper what we do, how we proceed, right? So layer number 2, that was layer number 1. Layer number 2, we need to make a note of some of the foundational iridology we see. We're just going to keep looking at her eyes and adding information to this. So the first layer in the actual iris assessment is that we need to determine her primary constitution. How many of you have been with me a few weeks ago when we did the 3 constitutions? If you were with me, give me 3 in the chat box. 3. If you were with me for the 3 constitutions where we talked about lymphatic, hematogenic, and biliary. Okay. So since many of you probably weren't there, but if you were, let me know. We want to talk about that. And I'm going to actually post a link. This might be to an older version of the 3 constitutions, but I'm going to post it in the messages. And you might want to grab that link to go back and review that when we're done tonight. When we look at the 3 constitutions, she falls into the lymphatic constitution. That means that she has blue eyes, and we see lots of fiber structure in her eyes. So when we look at these little threads, all these threads in here, this is fiber structure. So basically blue, lots of fiber. Now, each of the 3 constitutions or eye color types has its own metabolic tendencies. Almost everything else we do rests on that foundation. If we don't know what their primary constitution is, nothing else matters, because that primary constitution is going to alter everything else that layers on top of it, right? So lymphatic constitution, we know immediately from that this client has a tendency to be over acid in her tissues and blood. Now, notice I didn't say she is over acid. She has a tendency to be over acid. So let's begin integrating that with what you might already know about anatomy, physiology, and symptomatology. Okay, so maybe you've got some background there. Let me know in the chat box, what are some symptoms you might see if someone is systemically over acid? So we're not talking about acid in the stomach where they would have reflux. That's an entirely different picture. If someone is over acid in their body, their blood is too acidic, what kinds of symptoms might we see? And I want you to dig into any other training you've got or anything else you've studied or read. When someone is over acid, what kinds of symptoms might we see? And just so you know, this is how I actually teach the dynamic iridology assessment system course. I want to be drawing on what you know and integrating your knowledge so that you can see how it works with iridology. Anyone have any ideas? If you really have no ideas, give me no idea in the chat box. Crystal says no idea. I love the honesty, Crystal. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Chanel says fatigue. Fatigue could certainly be it. Roxanne says no idea. Love it. Think of acid as being hot. If you've got an area that's hot, what might happen? What might you see there? Rashes, acne, yeah, absolutely. Rashes, especially acne, maybe not so much, but that certainly, it could be if the body needs to offload the acid through the skin. Rashes could be it, like the way you're thinking here, Crystal, good job. Yeah, elevated heartbeat, high blood pressure, maybe not so much high blood pressure. The acid won't be quite so circulatory here, Chanel, unless we see other specific markers. I love the way you're thinking. I love the way you're digging. This is good. This is good. When we see elevated acid, we are looking for inflammation. We're looking for things in the body that are inflamed. So it could be an arthritis. It could be a bursitis. It could be a dermatitis. It could be a tonsillitis. Anything that ends in itis is an inflammation, right? And so we're thinking, oh, I wonder where she's inflamed. acid will always lead to inflammation. And so as we ask this, we want to ask her, or as we know this, we want to ask her, are you aware of any inflammation in your body? Or when we have excess acid, another word for that is mucus. Do you have excess mucus production? All right, we need some mucus to keep our mucous membranes moist and healthy. But if we have too much mucus, that's the body saying, I've got way too much acid. And the normal channels of dealing with it can't handle it. The kidneys are overloaded, the bowels are overloaded, the lungs might be overloaded. And if the lungs are overloaded, we're going to see the mucus congestion. The sinuses might be overloaded. We're going to see it there. Skin is overloaded. We're going to see it there with rashes and things like that. Krishna says, oh, would this also be getting a runny nose and congestion? Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Or recurring sore throat, so that mucus dripping down the back of your throat. Absolutely. So we would want to ask the client, when we see these beautiful blue eyes and we see her energy levels are low, do you have any symptoms like this? Now, we often have to be quite clear, because if I say, do you have any inflammation? Oh, no. No, I have no inflammation. Often our clients don't understand what we mean by that. So we need to break it down. Are there any joints that are stiff and sore, maybe that have arthritic deposits in them? How about your muscles, your soft tissues? Any of those feel maybe extra sore if you've gone for a long walk or done any kind of a workout, or they're just sore all the time? How are your sinuses? Do you find yourself always clearing your throat? Any skin rashes? Right? So we often need to give them examples of what this would look like. So we know that she has this tendency towards being over acid. We also know that her diet's pretty good. We're going to talk about that more in just a moment. This is that link to that video, right, that I posted in the chat box there. So we need to, we've determined her primary constitution. We've talked about that she tends to be over acid. So layer number 3, we want to know what her subtype is based on her eye color. So we've said she's got blue eyes, but from there, we've got several different subcategories that fall into that blue-eyed, fall under the blue-eyed umbrella. So with this, we are looking at colors. So we know that lymphatic means over acid. When we look at our blue eyes and we're looking for a subtype, we're going to look at things like this. Do we see patches like this in the eye? And we do. This tells us that she has a tendency, a predisposition towards being the over acid subtype. Not just that she tends to be over acid, but she is the lymphatic over acid subtype. We see these dots coming around here. Sorry, we see this edge here. Do you see this edge where there's really nothing in that edge? This is the big scurf rim. This tells us her skin doesn't like its job description. Your skin is your largest organ of elimination. Her skin may not want to offload acid the way it should. When we perspire, we are offloading uric acid. Uric acid is a salt. That's why our sweat tastes salty. The difference between uric acid through our sweat and our urine is that urine has bile pigment in it. Sweat does not. Okay. And then we've got these dots coming around the edge. We've got some thickening and some dots around the edge here. This tells us that she is hydrogenoid. What that means is that her lymphatic system, left to its own devices, and if she was a slackard, her lymphatic system would not flush properly. It would become sluggish and very built up with metabolic garbage and debris. So there's more subtypes on the possibilities list, but every eye doesn't have every subtype. Every eye doesn't have every kind of marking. So for this client, lymphatic, which means she tends to want to be too acidic. She is the over acid subtype, which increases that tendency towards being too acidic. Again, in her tissues, not in her stomach. She has a scurfrim, which is her skin saying, I don't want to offload acid. So where does the acid go that the skin was supposed to get rid of? And she's hydrogenoid. She's got these little clouds, these little cotton balls coming around the edge, which says that lymphatic system doesn't want to circulate properly. Now, that gives us a whole lot of information about her already, doesn't it? Each of these subtypes just augments what we already know about being lymphatic. So when we are looking at someone who tends to be over acid, not stomach acid, again, we're looking at tissue acid, two very different things here, and they usually don't coexist. Okay, we need to be considering, again, what would some of the symptoms be? Well, if she's tending to run over acid and her skin doesn't want to get rid of its fair share of the acid, we are likely going to see acid accumulate in her body that will lead to more inflammation. Okay. And so what we will often see with that is that someone who has an under-functioning stomach, so a low acid stomach, will tend to be very high acid in their body. In the dynamic iridology assessment system, we go through why that is. So again, some symptoms of being over acidic or having elevated uric acid in the tissue, we're looking at inflammation anywhere in the body. And that can, the over acid can do that. If the diet will support it, so if the diet is one that's going to build acid, this person's going to be way more prone to building the acid. If the diet is prone to congesting the lymphatic system, this person is going to be much more prone to having a congested lymphatic system. So we're seeing tendencies here. Our fourth layer is in the fiber structure. So we're looking at how are these fibers sitting in the iris. So we're going to ignore everything we've just done with color. We're going to ignore that this is a blue eye, that this person is over acid, has a scurfrim, and is hydrogenoid. Okay, now we are only looking at how the fiber is sitting in the eye. There are 4 subtypes when it comes to the way the fiber sits. We're not going to go into all of them, but I will mention them. We've got neurogenic, anxiety tetanic, polyglandular, and connective tissue. And each one of those structural subtypes has its own characteristics and traits. Now, these eyes are primarily connective tissue. So what that means is that we've got a very loose structure and we've got a lot of open areas in the eye where there's gaps between fibers. So this is not an overly strong physical constitution, which is interesting because she was a competitive skater, a figure skater for many years, and was a competitive figure skating coach for many years. And now she's a competitive ballroom dancer, right? So her structure is always being stressed. When we see that she is primarily connective tissue, we know that her structure, her physical structure is going to need, we're going to need to ask questions about how much support does it need that it might not be getting. She also has a lot of these leaf and petal shapes that are situated along this ring that's coming around here. And when we see them situated on this ring that is working its way around, it tells us that she is more predisposed to endocrine hormone imbalances. All right. So again, she's very physically active and her diet is mostly good and her diet is mostly supportive of his structure, but there is room for improvement. She has sustained some injuries that have seemed to have healed well over the decades, which is good. And we do want to be paying attention to her hormones, especially since she's in her 60s. And we just want her hormones to stay really happy. So as we look at all of this, as we see that she is prone to the endocrine, as we see that she is prone to some structural issues, we know where her dietary infractions are, and there's not very many of them, but they're important enough that we begin to understand why her energy levels are struggling. All right. So when you look back at her diet, what do you think the dietary infractions might be? That's why I asked you to write this down, because we want to come back to it. What do you think in her diet might not be good? Chanel says coffee. Yes, Chanel. Good job. The coffee is the big one. It is a huge one. It leads to more tissue acid. It depletes B vitamins. It revs the adrenals. It revs the thyroid. It's hard on the liver. Coffee is not a good thing to do. And so we need to talk to her about her coffee consumption specifically. The next layer we're going to look at is the pigment in her eyes. So you can see we've got little areas in her eye here. There's a tiny, very, very faint one here. There's another tiny, very faint one here. These pigments are really important. The interesting thing with iridology is the fewer and the smaller, the more important they are. If her eyes were absolutely freckled, we wouldn't look at each one individually. We would just look at them collectively. But because she's only got 3, we would address them individually in an assessment. The color of the pigment teaches us which organ or organs inherently want to be out of balance. So which organs want to be the troublemakers. The placement of the pigment tells us which organs are going to suffer because of it. I always think of this like a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, where the 5-year-old wants to get the 3-year-old in trouble. So what does the 5-year-old do? The 5-year-old starts poking at the 3-year-old until the 3-year-old goes, "Mom, make him stop, make him stop." And then the 3-year-old gets in trouble for yelling, right? It was the 5-year-old that caused the problem, not the 3-year-old. So in this case, the pigment color tells us the pancreas wants to run the show. So if the pancreas is out of balance, the energy will suffer. When we combine the pigment with the fact that we have the polyglandular or endocrine structural subtype here, that's 2 indicators saying that the endocrine system wants to be out of balance, and that can all come back to that pancreas again. Now, her hemoglobin A1C is really good, which is probably largely due to the fact that her diet is so decent and she is physically active. But still, when we see that her cholesterol and triglycerides are elevated, we know that that can be related to diet and pancreas and a few other things. So when we're working with her, we're looking at that diet and we're saying, why? What would be pushing that cholesterol out of balance? Again, it could be the aggressiveness of the coffee on the liver. Remember, liver assimilates the carbohydrates, turns them into cholesterol. That gets turned into hormones. Then the cholesterol or the liver has to break down those hormones again. But remember that elevated cholesterol is an indication of inflammation. So when we see elevated cholesterol, we know there is inflammation somewhere in the body. And it may be inflammation that the client's not even aware is happening. So if I'd seen this client 10 years ago with these exact eyes, I would have started coaching her on pancreas support, right? We would have been working on pancreas support right out of the starting blocks in an effort to keep her cholesterol and triglycerides in a healthier range. We would want to prevent her from going into elevated cholesterol because we know what the doctors do. They put them on medications, but those medications kill the energy. They really mess with how the muscles work, right? There's a lot of side effects from those cholesterol meds. So the next layer we want to check out for her, this client specifically, is her digestive and intestinal zones. And in her eyes, these are very compressed. This is the stomach zone. And the intestinal zone is just outside it it's outside the stomach zone, but it's inside this ring that is coming around, and on the top of her iris, it is squished right against the stomach. So there's not a lot of room here for her intestines to show, right? So as we look at this, this is suggesting us what we see in the stomach area, that she doesn't digest her proteins well. What would be a symptom of not digesting proteins well? There's several of them. What can you think of? Someone's not digesting proteins. What are we going to see? What do you think? She's got her plant-based protein in the morning. She's got animal protein at lunch, and again with her evening meal. What symptoms might we see if she's not digesting that well? Bloating, yeah. Yeah, we could have some bloating from the protein literally putrefying in her gut and off-gassing. Feeling sluggish after meals, yes, Chanel, absolutely. Feeling sluggish is another good one. Anything else? This is great. I love the way you're all thinking. Anything else? What does protein, have you ever, okay, let me tell you a story here. Back when all of our kids were at home, we had 7 children. I went grocery shopping one day and I asked the kids to help me put the groceries away. And I bought a whole chicken and it was supposed to go into the deep freeze. And it made it to the basement, but it didn't go into the deep freeze. What do you think that smelled like 3 days later for sitting out at room temperature? Horrible, LOL. Yes, horrible. I mean, it was in the basement and I was on the main floor and I could smell something. It was like, oh my goodness, what is that? So as a mother does, I followed my nose and I found this chicken sitting on top of the deep freeze. It was, you've got to be kidding me. You couldn't just open the freezer and drop it in. And there it was, rotting. When people don't digest their proteins well, they have protein farts. Eye-watering, room clearing, who died here, right? They are awful. So, question to ask when we see indicators in this area: are you gassy? Are you burpy or farty? If you're farty, is there an odor? Okay, important. So as we're doing this with this client and we're finding out her digestion, Chanel says, how about especially smelling bowels? Absolutely, because you've got the undigested protein there. So they're going to have bowel movements that is like when they leave the bathroom, they've turned on the fan, they've opened the window, and they put up a sign that says, give it 10 minutes, right? Because if anyone else goes in there, they're going to die from the odor, right? We all know people who don't digest protein well, don't we? We all know people who, and maybe it's us, who knows, right? So we've looked at things, right? This client tends to be overacidic in her tissues. We've seen indications of pancreas and endocrine not wanting to work well to keep her blood sugars balanced and to handle the carbohydrates properly. So things are ending up as triglycerides. And as we look at what we see here, we know she doesn't digest well. Crystal says, I've always thought that was from sugar in the diet. I guess I'm learning it's protein. Sugar in the diet gives slightly sweet smelling farts. Okay, so there's a difference between putrid and slightly sweet. Putrid is protein, slightly sweet in the person's opinion, nobody else's opinion, but the person's opinion. The person who passes a carb fart will go, oh yeah, well, so I passed gas, whatever. Right? Everyone else going, did you have to do that? But on a protein fart, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to leave the room while that just dissipates. Right? So we've got a difference in level here. So with this client, we do want her eating protein. She needs that because she's the connective tissue type. She needs the amino acids to help her tissues repair well. But she needs the amino acids, which means we have to support the digestion to help her break the proteins down well enough so that she can get the amino acids to be repairing tissues, right? And if we've got those proteins breaking down well enough, then we've also got amino acids to stabilize her blood sugars and keep her energy solid. Keep it, instead of it doing this in the day, it's more like this in the day, very gentle. So we wanted her to get 25 grams of protein per meal at least. And I recommended using a hydrochloric acid supplement, betaine hydrochloric acid, and did instruct her to get off her coffee. Now, what do you think the reaction is when I say to people, yeah, we really need to take the coffee away? What do you think the reaction is? Chanel says more. They are, and Crystal says they aren't going to do that. I love it. Yes, not me. LOL. Yes, Roxanne, absolutely. Dig the heels and fight tooth and nail to keep that coffee, right? Yeah, absolutely. So I usually don't say you have to quit this. I'm not going to go home and babysit them, but I will ask them to do an experiment, because an experiment is temporary, right? And I'll say, how do you feel about trying something, just an experiment, 10 days? What would happen if you stopped the coffee for 10 days and let's replace it with a coffee substitute, or depending on the person, maybe lemon in hot water, or maybe just hot water? What would happen if you did that and then at the end of 10 days go back to drinking coffee? And usually they'll go, 10 days, I can do that. No sweat. I've quit coffee before. Great. Let's have you do it. And as you do it, I would love you to keep track of how you feel, right? Literally 99% of the time when clients have done that test of coming off the coffee and then they go back on it. So she would go back to her big mug of coffee in the morning, after she's done her lemon water. 9 times out of 10, when they come back for a follow-up appointment and I ask, well, how'd you do with the coffee? How did you feel off it? Oh, I felt so much better, aches and pains gone. My stomach felt better, blah, blah, blah. And how are you feeling now that you're on it? Well, why would I go back on it? I felt so good without it. Yes. So I didn't have to take it away. Do you see the difference? They proved to themselves how it was messing with their chemistry. And so now that they've got that information, they realized it's not helping them in any way, shape, or form, right? People who say they need coffee to wake up don't need coffee to wake up. They typically just need the ritual of the warm mug. Put something else in that mug, right? So we got her to do those things, and we've seen her symptoms really, really improve. Her energy is coming up. When your energy is up, you can do emotional homework. When your energy's down, it's really hard to do emotional homework. So she has done a lot of emotional work on her own to heal from all of this family trauma that's been going on. And so we've got her feeling so much better. And we did it in baby steps, right? Really, the only big change we made, had her experiment with in that first appointment, was to come off coffee. And we introduced a few basic supplements to her, including the protein digestive aid, right? So it was really an easy transition for her. We don't always need to go to an iris map. We didn't even go to an iris map for this client. We don't need to. The iris map tends to make us want to slice and dice and work with minutia, when for so many things we need to work with the foundation first. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, to work on the foundation first? Crystal says yes. Yeah, we can work on the minutia all we want, but chances are if we do the foundation, we won't need to work on the minutia. And that's a good thing, right? So we often don't even go to an iris map. Rarely I will. And I've got iris maps, different iris maps that I can refer to, but the map should be the very last step in an iris assessment, if we even need to use it at all. Nitpicking those details that we would do with an iris map is a waste of time. And we need to remember, especially if we've got these photographs, we can come back to these photos as many times as we want in the next appointment and the next appointment and the next appointment, right? Because remember, the irides are genetic. The fiber structure is not going to change. The only thing that might come up and does often come up over time is pigments can surface in new areas, again, based on epigenetic cues, or pigments that are there currently may become darker and more pronounced, sort of more solid looking. Okay. So there you have it, the layers of an iris assessment. Even with all the chit-chatting and explanations that we did and me introducing myself, it's only taken us 45 minutes. Without the chit-chatting, when you know what you're doing, that should take less than 10 minutes. It should be just that quick. And then add some conversation with the client to get the background you need from them. So how quick and easy was that? So I want to know, what was your biggest takeaway? What was the thing where you went, oh, that's cool? What was the biggest takeaway? It's going to take you a little minute longer to type in because it's not a yes or a no answer. What was your biggest takeaway, your biggest aha moment? The thing where you went, I did not know that. That is cool. And while you're typing that in, does that sound like something you'd want to learn? That's pigments and organ involvement. Chanel, excellent, excellent. Yeah. Excess acid causes inflammation. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one, Roxanne. That's one we see a lot of with iridology. Excellent. Yeah, we've got to look at that diet. We've got to look at the digestion. We've got to look at the elimination channels to find out why is the excess acid accumulating. Crystal says, well, I like that there is a general approach, the bigger picture of the eye versus looking at details of the iris map. I always felt it was really overwhelming, but this seems great. Fantastic. I really appreciate that, Crystal. Chanel says, high cholesterol is an indication of inflammation. Yes. Doesn't that just put everything in a new light? Think of all the people you know who are on cholesterol medications. Then think about their diets. And we often think, what was a high fat diet? They need to be on a low fat diet, all that kind of stuff. And well, yeah, they need to be on a healthier diet, that's for sure. But they need to be on a diet that is going to help reduce their inflammation. That's the key. That is the key. And it's totally doable. Totally doable. So does that sound like something you'd like to learn? Does that sound like something that would be great to add to your practice? Now, if it does, you're looking at February 27th was last week. We have a cohort of the dynamic iridology assessment system that just started last week. And there's still a few seats available in it. Registration is open now. So if you're thinking, I think I want to get in on this, let me just give you a link here. There we go. Some things to be aware of. The next class is not until September. This class will finish mid-July. So if you want to get this done now, we should have a conversation. The only prerequisite for speaking with me about registering for the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System program at any time at all is that you need to have a college level anatomy and physiology class under your belt. So that might mean that you're a registered nurse and you did it there, or maybe you did it as a part of a year-long nutrition program, or maybe you are a herbalist and you did a standalone course inside that herbal program that was at least 60 hours of anatomy and physiology. That is a prerequisite because you need to know how the body works in order to do iridology well. So again, if you are interested in speaking with me about the course, grab that link. It's going to take you to a web page that'll give you a little more information about the course. And there is a button on that page that says, I want to talk with Judith, and we'll have a conversation, see if this is the right course for you. Is it the right time? You've got the prerequisites, and then we can get rolling with it if it is the right one for you. So before we wrap up, any other questions for me today? Again, just if you're thinking, yeah, great to do February 27th, but I've missed a class already, or I might miss 2 by the time I speak with Judith. Every class session is recorded, and you will have access to the recording, easy to go back and make up that class and get totally caught up. I've had quite a few students over the years that have enrolled after the 3rd lesson even, and have got caught up just fine. So if that sounds like what you'd like to do, grab that link and let's go with it. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. And I want to thank those of you who dropped comments today. It really fuels my energy to have that interaction with you. And I look forward to speaking with you soon about the course. Take care and have a great evening. Bye for now.